Do you remember where you were when you heard about the Challenger?
Mm.
I mean, it was one of those moments, right? Like everyone remembers exactly where they were.
It was one of those
It's
was,
like
yeah,
Kennedy, right? Everyone remembers where they were.
absolutely.
Um, and for a lot of people, it was really their first introduction to just how dangerous space travel is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we're going to take a deep dive today into the Challenger disaster.
Okay.
And we're going to examine not just what happened, the nuts and bolts of it, but also the why, the decisions, the pressures,
Yeah.
the human cost, all of that stuff.
Yeah. It's a story that continues to resonate today,
Mhm.
decades later. And what's so fascinating to me is that it exposes this tension, between ambition and risk, the drive to explore, and then also the consequences of pushing the boundaries.
So let's start with the shuttle program itself.
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a kid, it was like, this is amazing. We're going to have routine access to space. It's going to be like a space age airline. Like, how did that vision compare to the reality?
Well, the shuttle program was definitely ambitious. I mean, the idea was to create a reusable spacecraft that could launch like a rocket, orbit the Earth, and then land back on a runway like a plane.
Like just another flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Flying into space and back multiple times, it was a bold vision.
In Challenger itself, I mean, it was already a veteran of this program, right? This wasn't its first rodeo.
Right. So Challenger was the second orbiter in the fleet, and it had already flown 9 successful missions.
Wow.
It had deployed satellites, conducted experiments, and even carried the Space Lab module into orbit. So yeah, NASA considered it a reliable workhorse.
But if the shuttle program was supposed to be like this routine space travel, why was there so much excitement around this particular launch?
Well, the truth is, by the mid-80s, public interest in the shuttle program had started to wane a little bit.
Right. It wasn't the novelty that it was at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't the novelty it once was. And NASA realized that they needed to recapture the public imagination. They had to justify their budget to Congress.
Right, right.
So they needed something big.
And that's where the teacher in space program comes in, right?
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the idea was to send a teacher into space, have them conduct lessons from orbit, and really inspire this next generation of students. And so they had over 11,000 applicants, and they selected Krista McAuliffe, a
Wow.
high school teacher from New Hampshire.
Social studies, I think, right?
Yeah.
Social studies.
And her presence on Challenger, it was really meant to just reignite that sense of wonder that the early space program had.
Yeah. Like those first, Mercury astronauts and going to the moon, all that.
Exactly.
And speaking of, heartbreak and that kind of thing, there were warning signs. I mean, we know now that there were concerns about the shuttle, specifically about the solid rocket boosters,
Right.
long before that launch. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there were engineers, particularly from Morton Thiokol, the company that made the boosters. They had been raising red flags about the O-ring seals.
Okay.
And these seals were crucial because they were the things that prevent hot gases from escaping during the ignition.
Gotcha.
So faulty seals could lead to a catastrophic failure.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what worried them the most was how those O-rings would perform in cold temperatures. They had some data that suggested that in the cold, the seals could lose their flexibility and not create that tight seal.
And the weather in Florida that day was unusually cold. I mean,
It was the coldest temperature on record at Kennedy Space Center.
really, for Florida, that's crazy.
Icicles hanging off the launch pad structure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So knowing about these concerns, this potential for O-ring failure in cold weather, did anyone try to stop the launch?
Yes, the engineers did try to stop the launch. The night before, there was a teleconference between NASA managers and the engineers from Morton Thiokol. And the engineers argued very strongly against launching in those conditions.
So they were saying, "Hey guys, this is dangerous.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be doing this.
This is not a good idea.
It's too cold."
It's too cold. We don't know how those seals are going to perform. And it took guts to stand up to NASA, potentially delay such a high-profile mission,
Yeah.
especially with all the media attention,
The teacher in space.
teacher in space.
It's a big deal. So
Right.
what happened? Did NASA listen to them?
Well, this is where the story takes a turn from technical analysis to a deeper examination of human decision-making under pressure. There were so many factors, kind of swirling around: engineering data, political pressure, the schedule, and then in the end, human judgment.
Right.
Some folks argue that NASA felt that pressure, to stay on schedule.
Yeah.
They'd already had like several launch delays
Yeah, yeah.
in the months leading up to it. And there was, maybe the sense that Congress was getting a little antsy.
Oh, yeah. Like, come on, guys, let's light this candle.
Exactly. And, especially with the media attention on the Teacher in Space
Oh,
program,
yeah, totally.
another delay would have looked bad.
Right. Bad optics.
And there was also, I think, maybe a little bit of overconfidence at NASA at the time.
Uh-huh.
They had accomplished so much,
Oh, that's yeah.
overcome so many hurdles, and maybe there was this belief that they could manage the risk even if things weren't perfect.
Right. We got this.
We got this.
Yeah.
We can handle it.
It's almost like, that saying, success breeds confidence and confidence breeds. Sometimes it breeds bad decisions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And tragically, in this case, those pressures, those misjudgments led to a fatal decision.
The engineers' warnings were overruled.
They were.
Oh.
And the launch went ahead.
And 73 seconds later,
73 seconds later.
millions of people watched as the shuttle disintegrated.
Yeah.
I mean, what must that have been like for those astronauts in those final moments?
It's a question that has haunted a lot of people.
Right.
Investigators, the public, everyone. And, at first, everyone just assumed that the explosion was instantaneous,
Right.
that the crew didn't suffer.
Lights out.
Yeah. But the investigation, it actually revealed a much more kind of harrowing truth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the Rogers Commission, which led the investigation, they found that the crew compartment, that pressurized cabin where the astronauts were, it actually survived the initial breakup.
Wait, so they were still alive after the explosion?
The evidence suggests that at least some of the crew members were conscious, that they were aware as the crew compartment was ascending after the shuttle broke apart.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
That's horrifying.
Surviving that initial explosion, but then trapped inside this falling capsule, hurtling towards the ocean.
So what ultimately caused their deaths then?
The impact with the ocean.
Oh, why?
The crew compartment, even though it was intact, it wasn't designed to withstand that kind of high-speed impact.
Right, of course.
So it's just, it adds this whole other layer of tragedy to an already devastating story.
And I remember, after the disaster, it was almost like the whole nation went into mourning.
Yeah.
It was like, it wasn't just a news event. It was like deeply personal for so many people.
It was. The Challenger disaster, it wasn't just a technical failure.
Right.
It was this national trauma. And schools across America, I mean, think about it. The students were watching the launch.
Yeah.
They were excited to see Krista McAuliffe teach from space.
Right?
And it was just devastating. It was like this huge loss of innocence for a lot of people. This reminder that life is fragile and that pushing the boundaries like this comes with inherent risks.
And for NASA, it must have felt like, I don't know, like the world just stopped spinning.
It did. The shuttle program, they grounded it immediately.
Right.
Everything stopped. President Reagan appointed a special commission, the Rogers Commission, to investigate the disaster.
Right.
And they had this huge task in front of them. They had to figure out what went wrong, but not just like the technical cause of the accident. They had to look at the organization, the culture at NASA, and what role that played.
So they were looking at the human element,
Exactly.
the decision making.
Yeah.
Wow. So this commission, who was on it? Like, who were these people?
Well, it was led by William Rogers, a former Secretary of State, and it included, top scientists, engineers, astronauts. It was a serious group.
The A team.
Yeah, and their investigation, I mean, they were thorough, they were meticulous, and ultimately their findings were pretty damning.
And so what did they find? What was the big takeaway?
Well, first of all, they confirmed what everyone kind of suspected, which was that O-ring failure in the right solid rocket booster.
Yeah.
That was the direct cause of the Challenger breaking apart.
Right.
But more importantly, they found that there was this deeply flawed decision-making culture at NASA.
Oh, wow.
Where over time, scheduling and political pressures, they had kind of overtaken safety concerns.
Man, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is.
The idea that NASA, this iconic agency, could have this blind spot when it came to risk, it's hard to believe.
Yeah, and it was a complex situation for sure, but the commission concluded that NASA's organizational structure, it had become too compartmentalized, and that was hindering communication. Crucial information wasn't getting to the right people at the right time. And there was also this sense that the agency had maybe become a victim of its own success.
Yeah.
All the early wins of the space program, it fostered this culture of optimism, this belief that they could overcome anything.
Almost like a sense of invincibility.
Yeah, like we can do this, we've done it before.
Right, right.
But the very traits that had made them great, the ambition, the determination, the willingness to take risks, it had kind of become a liability.
Wow.
And the Rogers Commission report, it was a wake-up call for NASA and for everyone, really. It was a stark reminder that even the most brilliant people, the most innovative organizations, they're not immune to human error.
Right. Or to systemic failures. So what happened next? Like, what changes did NASA implement after this report came out?
Well, first of all, the shuttle program was put on hold for 2 years.
Wow.
2 years. And during that time, they implemented some major changes. They redesigned the solid rocket boosters, of
Right.
course.
Fix that O-ring issue.
Exactly. They came up with a much more robust, reliable system. But they also made changes to the organization itself, restructured management to put safety first. They improved communication channels between the engineers and the managers.
So it was a top-to-bottom overhaul of the whole agency.
It was. It was an attempt to learn from those mistakes, to rebuild public trust.
Right. But sadly, history repeated itself, didn't it? 17 years later with Columbia. Seems like some of those crucial lessons are forgotten.
It's eerie how similar the circumstances were. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated when it was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it killed all 7 crew members.
Another tragic reminder.
And just like with Challenger, there were warning signs. Engineers raised concerns, and they weren't fully addressed.
Leading to another catastrophe.
Exactly.
So what were the specific concerns this time around?
Well, during the launch of Columbia, a piece of foam insulation broke off from the external tank, and it hit the shuttle's left wing.
Ah.
And this wasn't completely unusual,
Okay.
but the size of the foam and how fast it hit the wing
Yeah.
really worried some of the engineers.
Right.
They thought it might have damaged a heat shield.
And that's obviously crucial coming back in.
Absolutely crucial.
It protects the shuttle from all that heat when you're coming back into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So did they try to, investigate the damage while Columbia was still in orbit?
They did have some discussions and analysis,
Okay.
but ultimately they didn't take any action.
Really?
Yeah, some managers downplayed the risk.
Wow.
They figured even if there was damage, it wouldn't be catastrophic.
I mean, it's that we got this mentality creeping back in again, right?
It seems like it. And that's actually what the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, that's what they concluded.
Yeah.
They found that despite all the lessons of Challenger,
Yeah.
NASA hadn't really created a true safety culture.
Right.
They still tended to downplay risks.
Yeah.
They were accepting these deviations from safety protocols.
And especially when they felt pressured for time or money.
Exactly.
So 2 shuttle disasters, 17 years apart.
Yeah.
Both because of failing to heed those warning signs.
And not putting safety first.
Yeah. It's a pretty sobering thought.
It really is. And I think it highlights how important it is not just to learn from your mistakes, but to really make those lessons part of your culture.
Right.
You got to create an environment where people feel safe to speak up,
Yeah.
where data and evidence are driving your decisions.
Absolutely.
And where safety is just woven into every single part of the mission.
Not just an afterthought. Yeah. I mean, these tragedies also raise some big questions about the future of space exploration.
All right.
Can we ever really make it routine? Can we make it safe for everyone?
Yeah.
Or will there always be that inherent risk, like a price to pay for pushing the boundaries?
That's the big question, isn't it? And space exploration is inherently risky.
Yeah.
You're pushing the limits of technology. You're going into the unknown.
Right.
You're facing forces that are way bigger than us.
Right.
But as we keep exploring, as we reach further, I think we have this responsibility to learn from what's happened before,
Absolutely.
to honor those sacrifices, and to really try to create a future where exploration is about safety and responsibility as much as it is about ambition and achievement.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure.
Yeah,
But Challenger and Columbia, they remind us that the stakes are just incredibly high.
they are.
We owe it to everyone who's been lost and everyone who continues to push those boundaries,
To never forget.
to never forget those
They're
lessons.
too important.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm kind of left with this mix of awe for the astronauts and their bravery,
Yeah.
but also profound sadness for their loss.
Yeah, it's hard not to feel that.
And, I think we also need to renew that commitment to remembering their legacy
Absolutely.
by trying to make the world safer, more responsible in everything we do.
It's the best way to honor them.
Well said. Challenger and Columbia, they're powerful reminders that progress isn't just about technology.
Right.
It's about the culture. It's about building those environments where safety comes first,
Uh-huh.
where people feel like they can speak up,
Yeah.
where questioning the way things are done is encouraged.
That's the only way we can truly learn and grow.
Exactly. Well, thanks for joining us for this exploration of the Challenger disaster and its lasting impact.
Of course.
We hope this has made you think and maybe even left you with some questions of your own.
It's a story that stays with you.
It really is. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a world where progress and safety go hand in hand. Until next time.